I used to believe that marriage slowly settled into calm routines, and that was normal. I thought comfort was a sign of stability. For years, my husband Daniel and I lived like that. We were not dramatic or overly romantic, but we laughed often and shared small rituals that felt like ours. It was not perfect, but it felt safe. At least, I believed it was safe. Things began to change so quietly that I did not notice at first. Daniel started coming home later than usual. He blamed work, long meetings, and last-minute deadlines. I believed him because I had no reason not to. I trusted him, and trust made me blind to the small signs that were already forming cracks in our marriage. He became distant in simple ways. He stopped asking how my day was. He no longer touched my hand while watching television. He answered my questions with short replies, as if speaking to me required effort he no longer wanted to give. Sometimes he seemed irritated just by hearing my voice. I told myself he was stressed. I told myself it would pass. One evening, I made dinner early because he had mentioned he might come home at a normal time for once. I wanted us to sit together and feel close again. I waited at the table with plates already cooling. He did not come home. He did not call. When he finally walked through the door close to midnight, he looked exhausted and tense. I tried to greet him gently, but he brushed past me and said he needed sleep. I lay awake beside him and stared at the ceiling. I felt something heavy sitting on my chest. It was the first time I wondered if I was losing him. I tried to push the thought away, but it stayed with me like a shadow that refused to move. The next day, I decided to make an effort. I wanted to pull us back together before the distance between us became too wide. I planned a small surprise. I cleaned the house, prepared his favorite meal, and even put on the perfume he once said he loved. I waited for him with a hopeful heart. When he finally arrived, he barely looked at the table I had set. He stared at his phone, muttered something about being exhausted, and walked straight to the bedroom. I stood there alone in the kitchen with the food growing cold. I felt foolish. I felt invisible. Something inside me whispered that this was not just stress. Something was wrong. Something was hidden behind his silence and late nights and sudden coldness. I did not know it yet, but that small whisper was the beginning of the truth I would soon uncover. A truth darker and far more dangerous than I ever imagined. The morning after he ignored the dinner I prepared, Daniel left the house earlier than usual. He did not say goodbye. He just grabbed his keys, checked his phone, and walked out. I watched the door close behind him and felt a deep ache in my stomach. I knew something was wrong, but I still told myself not to overthink it. I tried to stay calm. I tried to be patient. Later that day, I decided to wash the sheets because I could not sleep the night before. I wanted the room to feel fresh, as if a clean space could ease the heaviness I felt. While lifting his pillow, something slipped out and landed on the floor. It was a small receipt from a cafe I had never heard of. The date was from the previous night. The time was long after he had come home and gone straight to bed. For a moment, I just stared at it. It showed 2 drinks, 2 pastries, and a note at the bottom that said, "Thank you. See you next time." My heart began to beat faster. I told myself it could be a work meeting, but a quiet voice inside me said otherwise. He had not mentioned any meeting. He had come home irritated and alone. I picked up the receipt and placed it in a drawer. I felt guilty for keeping it, but I needed something to hold on to. I needed to understand what was happening to my marriage. That evening, I tried again to connect with him. I asked how work was. He answered with a tired, "Fine." I asked if he wanted to take a walk with me. He said he was too busy. His eyes stayed on his phone, and it felt like I was talking to a wall. The distance between us was no longer silent. It was loud and painful. Later that night, he said he had to leave early the next morning for a 2-day business trip. He did not give details. He did not look excited or frustrated. He was simply distant. When I asked if everything was okay, he looked at me for a moment, and his expression softened just slightly. It gave me hope, but the moment faded quickly. He told me not to worry and then turned away. The next morning, he left before sunrise. I stood by the window and watched his car disappear down the street. Something inside me felt unsettled. I could not shake the feeling that his trip was not what he said it was. After pacing the house for almost an hour, I finally decided to call the office where he worked. My hands were shaking as I dialed. When his assistant answered, her words made my entire body go cold. She told me Daniel was not scheduled for any trip. She said he had taken personal days instead. I thanked her and hung up before she could ask anything more, and my heart sank. I stood in the middle of the living room, holding my phone, unable to move. I realized that the man I shared a home with was hiding something from me. I did not know what it was yet, but this was the first clear sign. And it was only the beginning. After I learned that Daniel was not on any business trip, I sat down on the couch and tried to breathe normally. My hands felt cold, and my head felt heavy, as if the entire house had suddenly tilted. I kept asking myself if there could be a harmless explanation, but nothing I thought of made sense. He had lied. That part was undeniable. The question was why did I tried calling him once that afternoon. He did not answer. He never returned the call either. I did not try again because I did not want him to think I was checking on him like a jealous spouse. I was not jealous. I was confused and scared. I felt like I was walking through a maze where every turn led to another closed door. The following day, I decided to check the locations on our shared calendar. We used to update it together during the early years of our marriage. It helped us know each other's schedules and made life easier. Over time, he stopped using it, but occasionally he still added work events. When I opened the calendar, I saw nothing scheduled for those 2 days.
No meetings, no reminders.
No travel notes. It was completely empty. That made the life feel even more real. It was not a mistake or a misunderstanding. It was a choice he had made. He had wanted me to believe he was somewhere he was not. That I tried to distract myself with chores. I cleaned the kitchen. I organized the laundry. I even wiped the windows, though they did not need it. The silence in the house felt different now. It felt heavy and unsettling. I kept thinking about the receipt I found under his pillow. It was still hidden in the drawer. Every time my mind drifted back to it, my stomach tightened. Around evening, I decided to drive to the cafe on the receipt. I told myself I only wanted to see what kind of place it was. Maybe it was near his office. Maybe he had simply bought something on his way home. I needed anything that could make the life feel smaller. The cafe was on the other side of town, far from his workplace and far from anywhere he normally visited. It was a quiet place with warm lighting and a soft atmosphere. I stepped inside and looked around. There were a few people having coffee, and the barista behind the counter smiled politely. I ordered a drink just to avoid drawing attention. As I waited, my eyes wandered across the room. There were small tables for two everywhere. It was the kind of place couples visited. It was quiet and cozy. Something inside me sank a little deeper. When the barista handed me my drink, she said, "Your husband is not with you today?" The words hit me like a wave. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I tried to keep my voice steady and asked casually, "Why do you ask?" She smiled and said she recognized him. She said he had been there recently with a woman who seemed close to him. That I felt my chest tighten. I thanked her and left the cafe as calmly as I could. Once I got into my car, my hands began to shake. A part of me had suspected something like this, but hearing it felt completely different. It felt real. It felt like betrayal. I sat in the parked car for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. I did not know the woman. I did not know why he lied. I only knew that something was unfolding behind my back, and I had just taken the first step into discovering it. The truth was now reaching toward me, and I could no longer pretend it was nothing. When I finally started driving home, my mind kept replaying the barista's words. She had said it so casually. She had no idea her small comment was shaking my entire world. I gripped the steering wheel tightly and tried to steady my breathing. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. I told myself I needed proof before letting fear take over. But the truth was already forming like a dark cloud inside my chest. When I reached home, the house felt colder than usual. I walked from room to room, touching objects that once meant comfort. The silence felt sharper now. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at my phone. I wanted to call him and ask where he really was, but I knew he would not tell me the truth. He would find a way to turn the conversation into something else. He would say I was being dramatic or insecure. I did not want to give him the chance to twist things that I opened his social media out of desperation. He rarely posted, but sometimes he tagged coworkers or shared pictures from events. There was nothing new,
No hints.
no signs. It frustrated me even more. He was hiding something carefully, and he was good at it. Too good that I reminded myself that the barista might have been mistaken. Maybe the woman was just a coworker. Maybe the situation was innocent. I tried to make myself believe it, but the receipt, the lies about the trip, and the cold distance he showed me every day kept pointing toward something else. That night, I could not sleep. I kept imagining him sitting in that cafe with another woman. I pictured him smiling, talking easily, giving someone else the warmth he once gave me. The thought made my chest ache. I turned on the lamp and sat upright. I needed to calm down. I needed clarity, that I remembered something important. The barista mentioned the woman seemed close to him. That word stayed with me.
Close.
What did she mean by close? Was it physical closeness, emotional closeness, or simply friendly behavior? I needed details. I needed certainty because my mind kept creating pictures that terrified me. The next morning, I returned to the cafe. I felt strange walking in again, but I needed answers. The same barista was working.
She smiled when she saw me.
I approached the counter slowly and ordered a drink just to make the conversation seem natural. After she handed me the cup, I asked gently if she remembered the woman who had been with Daniel. She nodded without hesitation. She described her as someone with long dark hair and a quiet personality. She said they looked comfortable together, as if they had been there more than once. She even mentioned that the woman laughed softly at something he said. That small detail felt like a punch in the stomach. It painted a scene too clearly. I thanked the barista again and walked out. This time, I did not sit in my car. I began walking down the street, trying to clear my mind. The air felt cold, and the wind brushed against my face, but it did nothing to ease the tightness in my chest. I kept asking myself the same questions. Who was she? Why had he lied about the trip? Why did he hide this from me? I had no answers, only fear and confusion. But one thing became clear that morning. If I wanted to understand what was happening, I needed to follow the truth wherever it led. And whether I was ready or not, I knew I was slowly stepping into a part of his life he never wanted me to see. When I reached home from the cafe, I felt exhausted. My mind was filled with questions that kept circling endlessly. I sat down on the couch and stared at the wall, trying to understand how everything had changed so quickly. A few weeks ago, I believed our marriage was simply going through a stressful phase. Now I was discovering lies, hidden outings, and a woman I had never met. The shift felt overwhelming, and I did not know where to begin. I tried to distract myself by cleaning the house again, but no matter how much I busied my hands, my thoughts kept drifting back to the same place. I wondered if he would call or message me during his so-called trip. He had not done so the day before. That silence was another sign that something was wrong. I checked my phone repeatedly, but the screen stayed blank. Around noon, I finally received a call, but it was not from Daniel. It was from an unknown number. Normally, I would ignore it, but something told me to answer. When I picked up, I heard a woman's voice. She sounded surprised and a little nervous. She asked if she was speaking to Daniel's wife. My heart began to race because the voice was unfamiliar. I answered yes and asked who she was. She introduced herself as Emily. She said she worked at the company Daniel claimed to be visiting on his business trip. She explained that she was calling because she thought there might be a misunderstanding. According to her, Daniel had not shown up for his scheduled meeting with their team, and they had been trying to reach him. She said they were confused because he had confirmed everything earlier in the week. That I felt my stomach twist. I asked her carefully if she was sure he had scheduled something with them. She confirmed it without hesitation. She said he had even requested a visitor pass and a private office for the day. Her tone made it clear that she was not lying. She sounded concerned and slightly embarrassed for having to call his wife. When the call ended, I sat in silence. I realized something important.
Daniel had not just lied to me.
He had lied to his own workplace and another company as well. He had built an entire false schedule that made him appear busy to everyone around him. That was not the behavior of someone having an innocent lunch with a coworker. That was the behavior of someone hiding a large part of his life. That a thought came to me that I had been afraid to consider. What if the woman at the cafe was not the whole story? What if she was only a small piece of something much bigger? That afternoon, I searched through our documents. I checked the drawers where we kept bills, salary slips, and tax papers. I was not looking for anything specific.
I simply felt guided by instinct.
I needed to understand the real shape of his life. As I opened one folder, I noticed something unusual. Several bank statements were missing. They used to be there, but they had disappeared. I checked other drawers and found the same thing. Papers that should have been there were gone. A cold realization passed through me. He was not only hiding where he went and who he spent time with, he was also hiding money. The thought made my heart pound harder. I remembered the barista's comment. I remembered the lies. I remembered the missing documents. Piece by piece, something darker was forming in my mind. This was no longer just about another woman. Something else was unfolding behind the scenes, and I was finally standing on the edge of it. That moment, I understood one thing clearly. I was no longer dealing with a distant husband. I was dealing with a man who had built a separate life, and I had only seen the first shadow of it. The missing papers kept echoing in my mind long after I closed the drawers. I sat on the floor with the folders spread around me, feeling a strange mix of fear and determination. I kept asking myself why he would hide bank statements. There was no reason for that unless he was doing something he should not do. My hands were trembling slightly, but I continued searching through the drawers because I needed to know the truth. After several minutes of looking, I found an old envelope tucked behind a stack of unused notebooks. It looked worn and out of place. When I opened it, I found a single printed page folded inside. It was a bank account statement, but the account number was unfamiliar. The name on it was Daniel's, but the address listed on the document was not our home address. It was an apartment in a part of the city we had never visited together. My heart started pounding. The balance in the account was unusually high, much more than what he normally kept in our shared account. There were deposits that did not match his salary. Some of the amounts were too large for anything normal. I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. It did not make sense. He was not someone who loved taking risks. He was always careful and controlled. So why would he hide money in a secret account? I kept reading the page, hoping it would explain itself, but it only raised more questions. I tried to think of any logical explanation. Maybe it was an old account he forgot to close. Maybe he opened it before we got married. But those thoughts vanished when I looked at the date on the statement. It was from a few months ago. He had been using this account recently. A heavy feeling settled in my stomach. This was not something innocent. He was hiding money intentionally, and the fact that he kept the statement hidden proved he did not want me to know. My mind went back to his lies about business trips, his long nights away from home, and the mysterious woman. Everything was pointing to a bigger secret, something he was building behind my back. Did I place the document carefully on the table and sat back? I felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. I did not know what the money was for, but I knew I needed to find out. I thought about calling him and confronting him immediately, but I stopped myself. If I confronted him without understanding the whole picture, he might deny everything and hide deeper. He might start being more careful. I needed information before anything else. As I sat there thinking, I suddenly remembered something strange. A few weeks earlier, I had seen a message pop up on his phone while he was in the shower. It was only a preview, but it mentioned the apartment. At the time, I assumed it was related to a property his company managed. Now it felt like a clue I had ignored. The thought of an apartment connected to his name made my chest tighten. Was he living a second life? Was the woman from the cafe part of that life? Was he planning to leave me? Or worse, was he planning something that involved me without my knowledge? These questions spun around in my mind, and each one felt heavier than the last. I realized that if there was an apartment involved, I needed to find it. I needed to see it with my own eyes. The truth was no longer hiding behind small lies and suspicious behavior. It was sitting in front of me on a piece of paper. And that truth was leading me toward a place I had never imagined existed in my marriage. I knew I had to go searching. I knew I had to follow the trail. And I knew that whatever I would discover next might change everything forever. I placed the hidden bank statement on the table and stared at the unfamiliar address printed on it. Seeing it written so clearly made everything feel even more real. It was not an assumption anymore. It was a physical place connected to my husband's name, and he had never mentioned it. My hands felt cold as I copied the address onto my phone. I hesitated for several minutes before deciding what to do next. Part of me wanted to ignore it and pretend I had not seen anything. I wanted to believe it was all a misunderstanding. But the other part, the part that had been slowly waking up since the first lie, refused to look away. I knew that if I did not face the truth now, I would only keep sinking deeper into confusion and pain. I needed answers, even if they would hurt. Before leaving the house, I sat for a moment and closed my eyes. I tried to gather the strength I needed. I reminded myself that I deserved honesty. I reminded myself that no matter what I found, I would deal with it. After a few deep breaths, I grabbed my keys and left. The drive felt long because my mind kept racing. I wondered what kind of apartment it was. I wondered if he lived there when he said he was working late. I wondered if the woman from the cafe had ever been inside. I felt a mixture of fear, anger, and sadness. Nothing felt steady. Every stoplight made me question whether I was ready for whatever waited at that address. When I finally reached the neighborhood, I felt a strange sense of disbelief. It was a quiet area with clean streets and small modern buildings. It looked peaceful, almost comforting. There was no sign that it held secrets or lies. I parked across the street and sat in the car for a minute. I watched the entrance, hoping to gather my courage. The building was simple, with glass doors and a small lobby visible from the outside. It did not look like a place someone used for anything suspicious, but appearances often meant nothing. The real truth was usually hidden behind them. I walked toward the entrance slowly. My heart beat loudly in my chest. When I reached the door, I checked the list of residents on the wall. My breath caught when I saw his name. It was there, printed neatly beside a unit number. Seeing his name in a place I had never heard of felt like being struck. It confirmed everything I feared. This was not a mistake. This was something he had chosen to keep hidden from me. I pressed the button for his unit, even though I knew he was not supposed to be there. I waited, hoping for silence, and that was exactly what I got. I looked around and noticed a delivery driver entering the building behind a resident. My instinct took over. I stepped inside after them before the door closed. The hallway felt strangely quiet. I walked toward the unit with my husband's name on it. When I reached the door, I stared at it for a long time. My mind kept telling me to turn back, but my heart pushed me forward. I placed my hand on the doorknob, even though I knew it was locked. I did not try to force it open. I simply pressed my ear gently against the door. I listened for any sound, but there was nothing. I crouched down and looked at the small gap beneath the door. A faint scent drifted through it. It was a smell I recognized. It was his cologne that I felt my throat tighten. The scent confirmed that he had been here, probably many times. It was impossible to pretend anymore. He had a life I knew nothing about. As I stood there, fighting the urge to cry, I noticed something unexpected on the doorframe. There was a small mail slip tucked between the wood and the metal hinge. I pulled it out carefully. It was addressed to him, but the sender's name made my whole body freeze. It was the same woman from the cafe. In that moment, everything around me felt still. I knew the truth was no longer hiding in shadows. It was standing right in front of me, waiting for me to face it. I held the small mail slip in my hands and stared at the sender's name again and again. It was the same name the barista had mentioned. Until now, she had been a shadow in my mind, a stranger with dark hair and a soft laugh. But seeing her name printed clearly, addressed to my husband at an apartment I never knew about, turned that shadow into something real. My fingers tightened slightly around the slip as I felt my heartbeat grow louder. I leaned against the hallway wall for a moment because my legs felt weak. I tried to breathe slowly, but each breath felt unsteady. I knew I had found something important, yet I did not know what it meant. Was she someone he cared about? Was she part of whatever he was hiding? Or was she simply a piece of a much larger picture I still could not see? My thoughts swirled in circles without stopping. When I finally opened the mail slip, I found a simple note and a small key inside. The note was short. It said she hoped he would find the new arrangement helpful and that she appreciated his trust. There was no sign of affection in the writing, no romantic words, no hint of a relationship. Instead, it felt almost like a business message. But that made it even more confusing. Why would a woman from a cafe be giving him a key for anything? I looked down at the small silver key lying in my palm. It did not look like a house key. It was thinner and had a different pattern. It reminded me of a key used for a locked box or a storage unit. I wondered if the apartment contained something more than furniture. I wondered if he had hidden documents or money somewhere nearby. As I stood there thinking, I realized I could not stay in that hallway forever. Someone might come out of their apartment and ask questions. I placed the mail slip back where I found it, closed enough so it looked untouched, and walked quietly back toward the exit. My heart was pounding, but my mind was beginning to clear. I no longer felt like I was stumbling in the dark. I felt like I was finally holding pieces of a puzzle. When I stepped outside, the fresh air felt colder than before. I walked back to my car slowly. I kept looking at the key in my hand. I did not know what it opened, but I knew it was important. I placed it carefully into my bag and locked the car doors after getting inside. For a long moment, I simply sat there, staring at the steering wheel and letting everything settle inside me. The truth was becoming bigger. It was no longer about a distant husband or a secret cafe visit. It was about hidden money, a secret apartment, a woman who clearly had a role in his life, and now a key to something neither of them wanted me to know about. On the drive home, I kept thinking about the note's wording. She had thanked him for his trust. That line bothered me in a way I could not fully explain. It did not sound like two people in a romantic relationship. It sounded like she was helping him with something more serious, something that required secrecy and careful planning. Once I reached home, I sat on the couch and placed the key on the coffee table. I stared at it for a long time. Every instinct inside me told me it was connected to the missing bank statements and the strange deposits in the secret account. I knew I had to find out what the key unlocked. I knew it might lead me to the truth he had been hiding for months. But before I did anything, I needed to think clearly. I needed to understand what kind of person he had become. I needed to prepare myself because the truth might be darker than anything I had imagined. I leaned back, closed my eyes, and whispered to myself that I was ready to face whatever came next, even if it changed everything. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the small silver key on the table. I kept imagining what it could unlock and why my husband had tried so hard to hide everything connected to it. I replayed the note from the woman in my mind. The words about trust kept echoing in my thoughts. It felt strange, almost cold, as if their connection was not emotional but something practical, and that unsettled me even more. When morning came, I felt tired but more focused. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the table. I stared at the key again while the warm steam rose from the mug. I needed to think logically. If the key was not for the apartment, then it had to belong to something smaller. I thought about storage units, safety deposit boxes, and locked drawers. None of those ideas felt impossible. Someone hiding money and documents would likely use a secure location. I searched the number on the bank statement again, hoping it would lead me to something more. I noticed a small logo on the corner of the document. It belonged to a known financial service that offered private safety boxes. The discovery made my heart beat faster. It felt like the key was guiding me closer to whatever he was hiding. After a long moment of hesitation, I grabbed my bag and left the house. I felt nervous but determined. I needed to know the truth. The financial service office was across town. The drive felt tense because I kept imagining what I might find there. I wondered if I would discover proof of an affair, illegal transactions, or something else entirely. The possibilities felt endless. When I arrived at the building, I stood in front of the entrance for a moment. I took a deep breath before walking inside. The lobby was bright and quiet. A receptionist greeted me kindly. I approached the counter and asked if they offered safety deposit boxes. She confirmed that they did. I told her I believed my husband might have rented one here, and I wanted to confirm it. She asked for identification and some details. I gave her his full name and waited while she checked her system. Her neutral expression changed slightly as she looked at the screen. She told me that he did indeed rent a box. My stomach tightened, but I stayed calm and asked if I could access it. She explained their policy clearly. Only the person who rented the box could open it unless someone else was listed as an authorized user. She checked the file again and said there was only one name on the authorization list. It was not mine. It was the woman from the cafe. Her name echoed in my mind like a strike of thunder. I felt my chest tighten. I thanked the receptionist politely and stepped away. I sat on a small bench in a corner of the lobby and stared at the floor. I felt stunned. This was not just a hidden box. It was a box he trusted another woman with more than he trusted his own wife. The key in my bag suddenly felt heavier. I took it out and turned it in my hands slowly. I understood now. It belonged to his safety deposit box, and the woman was connected to it deeply enough to be listed as someone who could open it. But another thought slowly formed in my mind. If she had her own key, then this one was likely his. That meant he kept something inside the box that he wanted to access privately. Something he did not want either of us to know without his control. I looked around the quiet lobby and felt a cold wave move through me. He was hiding more than money. He was hiding something he wanted to protect with secrecy and shared permission. That I walked out of the building with the key still in my hand. I did not know what was inside that box, but I knew it was something serious. Something important. Something that connected the woman, the apartment, and the missing documents. I knew this was only the beginning of the truth. And I knew I had to keep digging, no matter how painful it became. I drove home slowly because my mind felt heavy with shock. The idea that Daniel trusted another woman with access to something so private felt like a deep cut. I felt anger, confusion, and fear all at once. I kept replaying the receptionist's calm voice in my head. Her words felt like a final confirmation that my husband was living a life I knew nothing about. When I reached our apartment, the quietness felt sharper than usual. I took off my coat and sat on the living room couch. The key was still in my hand. I placed it gently on the coffee table and stared at it. It looked harmless, but it held a truth I could not reach. The box was there, the secrets were inside, but the door was locked to me. It made me feel powerless that I tried to think about what I actually knew. The bank deposits, the hidden transactions, the second apartment, the woman, their shared authorization for the box. Nothing about this looked like a simple affair anymore. It felt like something planned and layered, something with purpose, something that had clearly been happening for a long time. That I wondered again about the documents I found in his office drawer, the ones that disappeared the next morning. I tried to picture them more clearly. They looked like contracts or agreements. I remembered one of the pages had a section with an odd stamp on it. It did not look like something from the company he worked for. It looked more private, more illegal. It made my skin crawl just thinking about it. As I sat there thinking, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Daniel. He said he would be late again and told me not to wait for him. His message felt cold and distant, almost like a stranger had sent it. I stared at the screen for a long time before turning off the phone. I did not reply. I did not trust myself to speak calmly. Later, I walked through the apartment slowly. I looked at everything with new eyes. I began checking drawers, shelves, and old boxes. I knew it looked desperate, but I also knew I needed answers. I searched carefully without making a mess. I did not want him to know I was looking. I opened his side of the closet and examined his jackets. I checked pockets, inside seams, and hidden corners. I found nothing, but when I moved a stack of folded sweaters, something small slid out and fell to the floor. It was a folded piece of paper. I picked it up and opened it. My hands felt cold as I unfolded it slowly. It was a receipt. A simple printed receipt. But it was not from a store. It was from a locksmith. It listed the purchase of a replacement key. The date was recent. It matched the same week he began acting strangely. And the address of the locksmith was close to the financial service office. I stared at the receipt while a strange realization formed in my mind. If he had replaced a key recently, then the key I found might not be the one he used now. Maybe he replaced his own key after realizing something. Maybe he feared someone else had access. I read the receipt again. It mentioned a duplicate service. That meant he had at least 2 keys. One he kept. One someone else held. Maybe the woman. Maybe someone else entirely. I sat on the edge of the bed holding the small piece of paper. I suddenly felt like the ground beneath me was shifting. This was no longer a simple secret. This was not even just betrayal. This was preparation. This was planning. Someone had a second key to that box, and it was not me. That meant whatever was inside did not just belong to Daniel. It belonged to someone else too. Someone important enough to trust with something he kept hidden from his own wife. I folded the receipt and placed it back where I found it. I needed time to think, and I needed to decide what I would do next. The next morning, I woke up feeling as if the air in the apartment had grown heavier. I carried the knowledge from the previous night like a stone in my chest. The receipt, the replacement key, the hidden deposit box, and the woman's name all formed a puzzle that I still could not solve. I kept trying to make sense of it, but every piece only made the picture darker. I went to the kitchen to make tea. While the water boiled, I stared at the small silver key on the counter. I felt strangely nervous around it, as if it held a pulse of its own. I knew I could not access the box alone. I needed another approach, something quieter and smarter. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I needed someone who might have seen things I missed. There was an older woman who lived across the hall. Her name was Mrs. Collins. She was kind and observant, and she always seemed to know what was happening in the building. She often chatted with me in the hallway, but she also had a habit of noticing details others ignored. If Daniel had been acting unusual near home, she might have seen something that I hesitated for a long moment before leaving the apartment. I did not want to involve anyone, but I also knew I was running out of silent options. When I knocked on her door, she opened it with a warm smile. She invited me inside, and I sat on her sofa while she prepared some tea. Her apartment smelled like lavender and old books, and for a moment, I felt calmer. She looked at me with gentle concern when she returned. She asked if something was wrong. I took a breath and told her I had been worried about Daniel lately. I kept my word simple. I told her he had been coming home late and acting distant. I did not mention the woman, the bank deposits, the key, or the box. I only said I felt something was off and wondered if she had noticed anything unusual. She looked thoughtful for a moment. Then she nodded slowly. She said she had noticed him leaving earlier than usual some mornings, even before dawn. She also mentioned that a few weeks ago, she saw him carrying a small black briefcase she had never seen him use before. She thought it was odd because he usually carried a simple laptop bag. She described the briefcase as slim and structured, almost like something used for documents rather than electronics. Her words sent a chill down my back. A new worry formed in my mind. Documents. Contracts. Papers he hid. A box he shared with someone else. A briefcase he only used when I was not around, and I asked her gently if she had seen him with anyone. She looked hesitant but answered honestly. She said she once saw him talking to a woman in the hallway near the stairwell. She described her as tall, with dark hair tied back neatly. My heart sank. Her description matched the woman from the cafe, exactly. Mrs. Collins said the woman looked anxious, as if she did not want to be seen. She said Daniel looked tense too, and they left through the stairwell instead of the main elevator. She assumed they were discussing work and did not think much of it at the time, and I thanked her quietly. I tried to act as if her words had not shaken me deeply, but I could barely keep my voice steady. After leaving her apartment, I walked back to mine slowly. Every step felt heavy. Inside, I sat down at the kitchen table. I felt the air grow colder around me. Everything was connecting now. The woman, the secret meetings, the briefcase, the second apartment, the shared access to the safety box. This was no casual affair. They were meeting in hidden places. They were exchanging documents. They were handling something serious enough to keep locked away. That I picked up the silver key again. I felt the weight of it in my hand. If I wanted answers, I would have to get closer to the truth myself. And I knew exactly where I needed to go next. I spent most of the afternoon sitting at the table, thinking about what Mrs. Collins had told me. Her quiet observations filled in gaps I had not been able to understand on my own. The early mornings, the new briefcase, the hidden meetings in the stairwell. None of it felt random. Everything pointed towards something organized and deliberate. As the hours passed, I kept returning to one thought. The second apartment. The woman had mentioned it so casually, almost carelessly, as if it was something ordinary. But nothing about this situation was ordinary. If Daniel had been meeting her there, then that apartment might hold answers I could not find anywhere else. I felt nervous even thinking about going there, but I knew I had reached a point where staying in the dark was more frightening than the truth itself. I searched through the documents again, hoping to find any clue that could help me locate the address. The bank papers only gave me the name of his employer. The missing documents had contained something more, but they were gone. I checked the envelopes, folders, and drawers again. Nothing else seemed useful. Then I remembered something. When Daniel had first gotten his new job, he briefly mentioned having to look at properties for work. He left a small stack of business cards in a dish near the front door. I had seen them many times without paying much attention. I walked over to the dish and sifted through the cards. Most were from real estate agents or building managers. But one card stood out. IT belonged to a private rental office. The name on the card matched the logo I saw on one of the old envelopes in his drawer before it disappeared. I felt my heart beat faster as I turned the card over. There was a handwritten note on the back. It was faint, as if he had written it in a rush. It listed a simple number. It looked like an apartment number. I grabbed my phone and searched the office address. It was only 15 minutes away. I hesitated for a moment. I felt a mix of fear and determination, but I knew I had to go. If that apartment held even a small part of the truth, then I needed to see it. The sun was already setting when I got into my car. The sky was painted with quiet shades of orange and pink, but the beauty of it did nothing to calm my nerves. I drove with careful speed, keeping my eyes on the road while my mind tried to prepare for anything. When I reached the building, I parked a short distance away. It was a quiet street lined with tall trees. The apartment building looked modern, with glass doors and clean hallways visible through the entrance. It did not look like a place where secrets lived, but I had already learned not to trust appearances. I stepped out of the car and walked toward the entrance slowly. My hands felt cold, and my breath felt heavier. I looked around to make sure no one saw me. The street was empty. A soft breeze moved through the leaves, creating a gentle rustling sound that only made the silence feel deeper. I reached the door and tried to steady myself. I did not know exactly what I was looking for. I only knew I had reached a point where stepping back was no longer an option. Every piece of information I had found led me here. Before I could gather my courage fully, I heard footsteps behind me. They were soft but quick, and they made my heart jump. I turned slightly, trying not to look startled. A man walked past me, heading toward the entrance. He carried a grocery bag and nodded politely before using his key to open the door. I acted as if I belonged there and followed him inside, without hesitation. He did not question it. The door closed behind us, and the hallway stretched out quietly in front of me. I felt a mix of fear and relief. I had made it inside. Now I only needed to find the apartment. And I needed to be ready for whatever waited behind that door. Once the man disappeared into his apartment, the hallway returned to complete silence. I stood still for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the warm but dim lighting. The building felt too calm, almost peaceful, which made my heartbeat sound louder in my ears. I reached into my pocket and took out the business card again. The handwritten number on the back felt like the only guide I had. I walked slowly down the hall, reading each door number carefully. My steps felt light, but every sound echoed softly against the walls. I kept glancing over my shoulder, even though I knew it would look suspicious if anyone saw me. I told myself to stay calm. I told myself I only needed to look, nothing more. When I finally reached the door with the matching number, I stopped. The moment felt unreal. I stared at the dark wooden surface for several seconds, unsure of how to move. This was the place the woman had mentioned. The place Daniel had visited without telling me. The place that was tied to the lies he had carefully built. I took a slow breath and reached for the handle. I did not expect it to open. I only wanted to test it. When my fingers pressed down, The handle moved slightly, but stayed locked. I felt a small wave of relief. I was not ready to face what might be inside, but I leaned closer and listened. There was no sound. No light came from beneath the door. It felt empty. Maybe no one had been here recently. Maybe they used it only for meetings, not for staying. The thought made my stomach twist. I looked around again, making sure the hallway was still empty. Then I crouched slightly and examined the lock. I wondered if the silver key in my bag might fit. The idea frightened me, but curiosity pushed me forward. I took it out and held it near the keyhole, but I did not insert it. I hesitated because part of me feared what would happen if it clicked open.
I was not ready for that.
Not yet. Instead, I slipped the key back into my bag and forced myself to walk away. I needed a different approach. I needed information, not a break-in. As I reached the end of the hallway, something caught my eye. A small security camera was fixed above the elevator door. It was angled slightly downward, watching a portion of the hallway, including the door I had been standing in front of. The realization made my skin prickle. If the building kept recordings, then someone could see me walking around near that apartment. Someone could even see Daniel meeting the woman here. The camera suddenly felt like an important clue, something I had not expected. I waited for the elevator while trying to appear calm. When the doors opened, I stepped inside and pressed the button for the lobby. As the elevator moved down, I felt my nerves settle just enough for a clear thought to form. If I could speak to the building manager, I might learn who rented the apartment. I might even learn how often it was used. I knew managers did not freely give private information, but people tended to talk more openly when they believed the situation was harmless. I needed to try. When I reached the lobby, I spotted a small office near the entrance. A glass door displayed the words "Management" in neat lettering. The office lights were still on. I walked toward it with steady steps, trying to appear confident rather than tense. Inside, a middle-aged man sat behind a desk, typing on a computer. He looked up and smiled politely when I entered. I returned the smile and introduced myself. I told him I was thinking about renting in the building and wanted some information about available units. His smile grew warmer as he began explaining details about the building. I listened carefully and waited for the right moment. After a few minutes, I asked about the apartment number I had just visited. I acted as if it had caught my interest because of its location in the building. The manager paused. His friendly expression faded slightly. He looked uncomfortable, as if the question touched something he did not want to discuss. He said the unit was currently occupied but rarely used. He said the tenant preferred privacy. I asked gently if the tenant was a man or a woman. He hesitated again before saying it was rented under a business name, not a person. He added that someone came by occasionally to check the place, but he never saw anyone stay long. His tone grew cautious. He clearly knew more than he wanted to share. I thanked him politely and left the office without pushing further. My mind raced as I stepped back into the lobby. A business name. Occasional visits. Rare use. This was no ordinary apartment, and whatever Daniel and the woman were involved in was far more controlled than I understood. I walked out into the cool evening air feeling colder than before. The truth was taking shape, piece by piece, and I knew the next steps would only lead me deeper. I sat in my car outside the building for a long moment before turning the engine on. The street was still quiet, and the soft glow from the apartment windows made everything look peaceful, almost gentle. It felt strange knowing something hidden and serious was happening behind those calm walls. I gripped the steering wheel and took a slow breath before driving away. On the way home, I kept replaying the manager's words in my mind. The apartment was not rented by a person. It was rented by a business. That detail felt heavier than anything else I had learned so far. A business rental meant contracts, money, and a reason to hide the true owner. It also meant that whatever Daniel was involved in was not private or emotional. It was structured and intentional. When I reached home, the apartment felt colder than usual. I turned on a lamp in the living room and sat at the table. My bag lay open beside me, and the silver key glimmered faintly under the warm light. I opened the small notebook where I had written down notes about everything I had discovered. The list kept growing, and each new detail pushed me further from the woman I used to be, that I decided to focus on the business rental. I searched the name of the building manager's company on my laptop. After several minutes, I found the official rental website. It listed properties rented by different organizations, but most details were private. I clicked through different pages until I found a small link at the bottom labeled Corporate Accounts. I opened it, and a list of company names appeared. I scanned the list carefully. Most names looked unfamiliar, but one caught my attention. It matched the faint logo I remembered from the corner of the bank document that had confused me days earlier. I clicked the name and opened a short description. The company appeared to be a consulting firm that handled financial management and private agreements. My stomach tightened as I realized the same company might be tied to the money transfers in the bank statements. I kept clicking through links and searching for anything more. Then I found a downloadable PDF with a list of authorized representatives. I opened it quickly. The document loaded slowly, and the page scrolled down in a clean format. My eyes moved over the names one by one. At first, nothing stood out. Then I saw it, a name I had never heard before, followed by a title that startled me. But next to it, in smaller print, was a second name, my husband's name. Seeing it there made my breath catch. It felt different from seeing his signature on a bank statement or a receipt. This was formal. This was legal. This was involvement he had never mentioned, not even once did I read the role assigned to him. It said secondary coordinator. I did not understand what that meant, but it did not sound simple. Underneath that, the document listed duties: financial transport, document handling, and meeting oversight. The words made something inside me go numb. Financial transport, document handling, meeting oversight. These were not random bank deposits. These were structured tasks. Tasks that connected him to the secret apartment, the briefcase, and the woman. As I scrolled further, I found something else. A small section listed access rights for corporate properties. My eyes widened when I saw the apartment number written clearly on the list. He had full access, but he was not the primary contact. That position belonged to the first name I saw at the top of the list. I stared at that name carefully. It belonged to a woman, the same woman from the cafe. Her full name was printed in bold. She was the primary representative. She held the highest authority. She was not just someone he knew. She was someone with power over whatever he was involved in. I leaned back in my chair slowly. My hands felt cold. Everything was becoming clearer, but at the same time, it was becoming more dangerous. This was not an affair. This was not a simple secret. This was a partnership. Point one built on money, documents, and a locked apartment. I closed the laptop gently and rubbed my forehead. I could feel a small tremble in my hands, but I forced myself to stay steady. I needed to think. I needed to be careful. And I needed to decide how far I was willing to go, because now I was certain of one thing. Whatever my husband was involved in was far bigger than I had ever imagined. That night, I could not calm my thoughts long enough to sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while the room stayed silent around me. The document I had read kept replaying in my mind. The woman's name, her position, her authority over the apartment and the meetings. My husband's listed role under her. Everything formed a clear picture, but it was a picture I wished I had never seen. I waited for Daniel to come home, but the hours passed and the apartment remained quiet. Midnight faded into early morning, and still he did not appear. I picked up my phone several times, thinking about calling him, but I could not make myself do it.
I did not know what I would say.
I did not know if I could pretend anymore. A part of me wanted answers from him directly. Another part feared the lies he might tell. I had reached a point where I trusted my own discoveries more than I trusted his words. Around dawn, I sat by the window with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders. The sky outside was pale and still. I watched the light slowly stretch across the buildings. I felt numb, but a quiet determination began to build inside me.
I was tired of reacting.
I needed to ACT. My phone buzzed suddenly. The sound startled me. I grabbed it quickly, hoping it was him, but the screen showed an unknown number. I hesitated before answering. A woman's voice spoke on the other end. Her tone was low and careful. I did not recognize her at first, but something in her voice made my heart thud painfully. She introduced herself calmly, as if we had met before. Then she said her name. It was the woman from the cafe. Hearing her voice directly felt surreal. For a moment, I could not breathe. I asked her why she was calling me, and she paused as if choosing her words.
She said she needed to speak to me.
She said it was important. She asked if we could meet, and my mind raced. I asked her how she got my number. She avoided the question. She only repeated that she needed to talk. Her voice did not sound angry or defensive. It sounded worried, almost frightened. That frightened me even more. I told her I was not comfortable meeting her, but she insisted. Her voice shook slightly. She said she could no longer keep things quiet.
She said something had changed.
She said she knew I had been looking into things and that I needed to understand what was happening before it went too far. Her words felt like sudden cold water on my skin. I whispered, asking what she meant, but she told me it was not safe to talk on the phone. She asked me to meet her in a public place, somewhere open and busy. She suggested a small cafe near the river, one I knew well. That I did not agree at first. I kept asking why she wanted to meet me and what she needed to say. She stayed quiet for a moment. Then she said something that made my breath stop entirely. She said my husband was not who I thought he was. Her voice broke slightly as she spoke, and she apologized quietly. She said she was done protecting him. She said she had reached her limit. Then she begged me to meet her just once. Before I could respond, she ended the call. I sat frozen with the phone still pressed to my ear. My hands were shaking. Her words kept echoing in my mind. Not who I thought he was. Done protecting him. Reached her limit. None of it made sense, but all of it felt painfully real. I stood up slowly and walked back to the table. The small silver key was still there. I stared at it for a long moment. Everything inside me told me that whatever she wanted to say was connected to that key. The deposit box, the secret meetings, and the documents I had not been able to reach. I finally picked up the key and held it tightly in my hand. If she was willing to talk, then I needed to listen. I needed every truth she was ready to give. I took a deep breath, grabbed my coat, and prepared to leave the apartment. My heart felt heavy, but my steps felt steady. I was going to meet her, and I knew that whatever she told me would change everything. The cafe she chose sat near the river, a place where people often walked their dogs or sat on benches to watch the water. It was open and bright, exactly the type of place someone would pick if they were afraid of being overheard. I arrived earlier than the time she suggested because I wanted a moment to gather myself. I sat at a small table near the window and watched the door carefully, and my heart beat heavily with each minute that passed. Part of me still hoped she would not come. Another part feared she might never arrive. I kept running her words through my mind. She sounded shaken. She sounded tired. She said she could not protect him anymore, and that sentence replayed in my head like a quiet warning. A few minutes later, I saw her walking up the sidewalk. She looked different from the day at the cafe near the office. She walked slower, and her shoulders looked tense. When she stepped inside, She scanned the room quickly before her eyes landed on me. She approached the table and sat down without saying anything at first. Her hands trembled slightly as she folded them together. For a long moment, we just looked at each other. I could feel the weight of everything unsaid pressing between us. Finally, I asked her why she called me. Her eyes softened, and she let out a slow breath. She said she had been struggling with this for a long time. She said she knew I had noticed something was wrong, and she believed it was only fair that I understood the truth. I asked her directly if she and my husband were together. She shook her head quickly and said it was not what I thought. She said she cared about him once, but not in the way people assume. Their connection was not romantic. It was built on work, trust, and something she called a shared responsibility. The way she said it made my stomach tighten. I asked her what she meant. She glanced toward the window and lowered her voice. She said the company they worked for dealt with sensitive financial matters, the kind that required secrecy. She said Daniel had been pulled into something bigger than he expected. She said he tried to manage it, but he made mistakes. Serious mistakes that I felt a cold wave move through my body. I asked her what kind of mistakes. She hesitated, then told me that some documents and funds had gone missing. She said Daniel had signed forms he did not fully understand. She said he trusted the wrong people. Her words grew more strained as she spoke. She told me she had tried to warn him, but he pushed her away and became distant. I asked her if she was involved. She stared at the table for a moment before saying she was responsible for overseeing him. She watched his work. She monitored the documents. She made sure he followed the rules. But she said he started hiding things even from her. He stopped meeting deadlines. He took the briefcase without permission. He visited the apartment alone when he was not supposed to. She said the last time she saw him, he looked different, nervous, distracted. She told him something was wrong, but he brushed her off and said he would fix everything. She admitted she did not believe him. I asked her why she contacted me. Her eyes grew sad. She said she knew he was lying to me, and she knew he was in trouble. She said she could not watch everything fall apart silently anymore. She told me she believed I deserved to know what was happening because I might be the only person he would still listen to. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice even more. She said the deposit box was important. She said he kept something inside it that he should not have taken. Something that did not belong to him. And my breath caught. I asked her what was inside. She closed her eyes briefly and said she did not know for sure. She said only he knew. And the key I found was the only way to open it. She opened her eyes again and looked directly into mine. Her voice was gentle but firm. She said I needed to be careful because whatever he was hiding had already put him at risk, and now, without meaning to, it had put me at risk too. Her warning stayed in the air like a heavy fog. I felt it settle around me and tighten slowly, as if the room had suddenly become smaller. I tried to breathe normally, but it was hard to ignore the quiet panic rising in my chest. I asked her what she meant by being at risk. She looked down at her hands before answering, almost as if she regretted everything she had already said. She explained that when documents go missing in their field, people notice quickly. She said the company had already started looking into the situation. They were asking questions. They were pulling records. They were checking who had access to what and when. She said Daniel's name had been mentioned more than once, and not in a positive way. But then she added something even more unsettling. She said it was not just the company asking questions. I asked her who else was involved, but she did not answer right away. She looked toward the window again, watching the slow movement of people outside. When she finally spoke, her voice was almost a whisper. She said some of the company's partners were growing impatient. These were people who expected complete loyalty. They expected results. They expected secrecy. She said they had a habit of becoming aggressive when they felt betrayed or kept in the dark. Her words made my skin prickle. I told her I still did not understand what any of this had to do with me. She said it was simple. I had the key. I had the last item he was connected to. And even if I wanted nothing to do with this, someone might think I knew more than I did. She said people who felt threatened sometimes acted before asking questions, that I felt a cold numbness spread through my limbs. I asked her how long she had known something was wrong. She admitted she had suspected it for months, but she hoped Daniel would handle it quietly. She said she tried to protect him by adjusting reports and clearing deadlines when she could. But she said it reached a point where she could no longer hide his mistakes. Things had gone too far and other departments were starting to notice. She said she knew she would be questioned soon, and she wanted to tell me the truth before everything became official. I sat in silence, absorbing her words. I asked her why she cared so much. She gave a tired smile and said she once believed in him. She believed he was capable of something great. She believed he was honest. But she said people change under pressure. She said he became guarded, jumpy, and distant. She said he stopped answering calls. He stopped attending meetings. He stopped trusting anyone. I asked her if she thought he was in danger. She looked directly at me and said yes. She believed he was running out of time. She said he had probably planned to fix everything by retrieving whatever was in the deposit box. She said maybe he thought he could negotiate or return the missing item before anyone noticed. But then he disappeared. And now no one knew what he was planning to do next. I asked her if she thought he would return. She hesitated before answering. She said she hoped so, but she could not promise anything. She said his behavior had become unpredictable. She said he might be trying to protect me, or he might be trying to protect himself. She said she did not know anymore, because the man she worked with was not the same man she knew now. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She slid it across the table toward me. She said it was the address of a storage facility he visited 3 times in the last month. She said she found the location through old access logs. She believed it might be connected to the deposit box or the missing files. She told me to go there only in daylight. She said I should keep the key somewhere safe. And she said if I found anything inside the storage unit, I should not touch it with my bare hands. I stared at the paper, feeling the weight of it the moment my fingers brushed its edge. Then she leaned forward, her face tight with concern. She said I still had a chance to walk away from all of this, but if I chose to continue, I needed to be prepared for the truth, because the truth, she said quietly, was far more complicated than I imagined. I left the cafe with the folded paper in my hand, feeling as though I had stepped out of one world and into another. The sun was still bright outside, yet everything felt dimmer. Every passing car, every quiet stranger, every sudden sound made me more aware of myself than usual. I kept glancing over my shoulder while walking to my car, even though I tried to convince myself there was no reason to. Fear has a way of settling into your thoughts, even when nothing around you has changed. When I sat behind the wheel, I unfolded the paper again. The address looked ordinary enough. It belonged to a storage facility on the edge of town, near an industrial area where most people went only for work. I had driven past it many times without noticing it. Now it felt like the center of everything. I told myself to go home first. I wanted time to think. I wanted to understand why Daniel had visited the place 3 times. I wanted to calm down before I walked into something I could not undo. Home. The silence made me uneasy. The house felt different now, as if the truth the woman had shared had followed me through the door and waited beside me. I walked through each room slowly, feeling a strange heaviness settle over me. I tried to convince myself that I should leave this situation to the authorities. I told myself that the safest option was to walk away. But something inside me refused. I needed answers. I needed to understand why Daniel had done all of this. I needed to know what he had been hiding from me. I waited until the next morning before going to the storage facility. The sun was bright again, and I tried to take that as a sign of safety. The building was surrounded by tall metal fencing, and long rows of identical doors stretched out in both directions. It looked like every storage facility I had ever seen, which somehow made it even more unsettling. Nothing about it hinted at danger, yet everything about it made my stomach tighten. Inside the main office, a bored-looking man sat behind a small desk. He barely looked up as I stepped inside. I told him I needed information about a unit. He asked for the number. I gave him the one written on the paper. He typed it into his computer, and then something changed in his expression. His posture straightened slightly, and his eyes narrowed just a little. He asked me for the name on the account. I hesitated before saying my husband's name. He looked at me for a long second before turning back to the screen. He said the account was active, but he added that no one had visited the unit in over 2 weeks. Then he asked me if I had a key. I said yes. He nodded and told me I could go to the unit on my own. He did not ask many questions, but I noticed the way he glanced at me when I turned to leave. It was a quiet, uncertain look, as if he sensed something was unusual but did not want to involve himself. I walked through the rows of units until I reached the one Daniel had rented. The numbers on the doors were faded, and the ground was covered in dust and scattered leaves. When I stopped in front of the correct door, I felt the wave of nervousness wash over me. I stood still for a moment, listening to the distant hum of traffic and the occasional call of a bird. Everything was quiet, but my hands shook as I reached into my bag. I pulled out the small silver key. It felt strangely heavy in my palm. I slid it into the lock, and for a moment it resisted. Then it clicked. The sound echoed softly, but it sent a chill down my spine. I lifted the door slowly. Dust drifted out as it rose. At first glance, the unit looked nearly empty. There was a single metal shelf pushed against the wall. A wooden crate sat beneath it, closed but not locked. A thin layer of dust covered the floor, except for a faint trail of footprints leading toward the back. The footprints were not Daniel's. They were too large, and there were 2 sets of them. My breath caught as I stepped inside. The air felt cool and stale. I crouched beside the crate, my heart pounding louder with every second. I lifted the lid slowly. Inside, wrapped in a dark cloth, was a black binder with no label, nothing else, and no documents.
No boxes.
No equipment, just a binder. I reached for it, but stopped when I remembered her warning. Do not touch anything with your bare hands. I pulled my sleeve over my fingers and lifted the binder carefully. It felt heavy, heavier than any binder should. I held the binder with my sleeve wrapped tightly around my hand, feeling its unexpected weight steady against my palm. It was heavier than I imagined, almost as if something hidden inside it pressed against the covers. I set it down on the metal shelf, still careful not to let my fingers touch it directly. The storage unit felt colder now, and I kept thinking about the 2 sets of footprints. They were not fresh, but they were not old either. Someone had been here before me. Someone who was not Daniel. I opened the binder slowly. The first thing I saw was a stack of documents held together by metal clips. Most of them had long strings of numbers across the top, followed by blocks of text I did not understand. They looked like financial reports or coded spreadsheets, the kind of paperwork that only trained people could interpret. I flipped through the pages gently, each one filled with strange terms and signatures from people I had never heard of. Some signatures were blacked out. The deeper I went, the more confused I became. There were several pages that looked like transfer records, each showing large amounts of money moving between accounts. Some transfers were crossed out, while others had notes scribbled next to them. I recognized Daniel's handwriting on those notes. His familiar, careful lines made my chest tighten. The notes were short, almost hurried, as if he had written them while rushing through the papers. One note said, "Fix before end of month." Another said, "Not my signature," which made my stomach twist sharply. I turned to a sealed plastic sleeve tucked inside the back pocket of the binder. A small envelope sat inside it, unmarked and plain. I stared at it for a moment before deciding not to open it yet. I knew I needed to be cautious. Even touching the binder felt risky. I remembered what the woman had said about missing files and the kind of people who were connected to them. My heart beat faster as I closed the binder softly. I took a careful breath and looked around the storage unit again. The place was empty except for the shelf and crate, but it felt watched. The silence was sharp, as if the entire space were waiting for something. I told myself I needed to leave. Staying too long in a place someone else had clearly visited made me feel exposed. I slid the binder into my bag, covering it with a scarf so no part of it pressed directly against my skin. Before I left, I glanced again at the footprints. They led into the unit and then out again. The second pair appeared to have deeper marks, as if the person was carrying something heavy when they left. That thought chilled me. I pulled the door down firmly and locked it behind me. The metal door clanged shut, echoing across the long row of units. Walking back toward the office, I noticed a black car parked at the far end of the lot. The windows were tinted, and I could not see inside. At first, I thought it was just another customer, but something about the way it sat perfectly angled toward the units made me uneasy. I kept my gaze ahead and did not slow down. I could feel the weight of the binder in my bag, and it felt like carrying a secret I was not ready for. As I passed the office window, the man behind the desk glanced up. His eyes followed me for a moment, longer than before, as if he sensed I had found something important. I stepped out into the sunlight and walked toward my car with steady steps, even though my legs felt weak. Once inside, I locked the doors immediately. I took one last look at the black car, but it did not move. Still, I could not shake the feeling that someone inside it was watching me. I put the key in the ignition and left the parking lot without looking back again. Driving home, my mind raced. I kept thinking about the documents, the strange transfers, Daniel's frantic notes, and the mysterious envelope. I also kept thinking about the footprints. The binder was not just paperwork. It was evidence of something bigger than I understood. And if someone else had already come looking for it, then they were not done. They would look again, and they would expect to find it. When I got home, I locked the door behind me and stood in the hallway for several long seconds without moving. The silence of the house felt heavier than before, as if the binder I carried had changed the air. I set my bag gently on the table and took a deep breath. My hands were still slightly shaky, and I tried to calm myself by moving slowly and quietly. I kept listening for sounds outside, half expecting the black car to appear at the end of the street. I sat at the dining table and pulled the binder out carefully, still using the fabric of my sleeve. I placed it in front of me and opened it again, slower this time. My eyes went straight to the plastic sleeve at the back. The small plain envelope inside it felt like the only thing that mattered now. All the documents, numbers, signatures, and mysterious notes were overwhelming, but the envelope felt personal. It felt like it might hold the one thing Daniel wanted to hide most. I slid the envelope out and set it on the table. It was unmarked, sealed, and slightly worn at the edges as if it had been handled many times. I stared at it for a long moment, afraid of what I might find inside. Part of me hoped it would be something simple, something harmless, something that explained everything without making things worse. But another part of me knew better. Nothing about this situation had been simple so far. I opened the envelope slowly by slipping a butter knife under the flap. Inside, there was a folded sheet of paper and something small and metallic wrapped in tissue. I unfolded the paper first. It was a letter written in Daniel's handwriting. His familiar neat script made my throat tighten. The letter was short. He wrote that he had discovered something at work that he should never have seen. He said he had made a mistake by trying to fix it alone. He apologized for the distance, the lies, and the secrets. He said he did everything because he thought he could protect me, but things had spiraled out of his control. He wrote that if anything happened to him, the item in the envelope should never be given to the company or any of their partners. He said the people involved were dangerous. He said they would do anything to keep their actions hidden. He told me to trust no one except the person whose name he wrote at the bottom of the letter. The name was someone I had never heard before. The moment I saw it, I felt a strange chill. If I had expected clarity, the letter only brought more confusion. I read it twice, hoping the lines would make more sense, but they didn't. I set the paper down and finally unwrapped the metallic object. It was a small flash drive. Black.
Plain.
No label. Its ordinary appearance made it even more unsettling. I turned it over in my hand, still using the tissue, so my fingerprints would not touch it. There was nothing written on it, nothing to hint at what it contained. I placed it next to the letter and stared at both items, trying to understand the full weight of what I was holding. Daniel's words repeated in my mind. If anything happened to me, if anything happened. It felt like a warning. It felt like he had known something was coming. As I sat there, the doorbell rang. The sound cut through the house sharply and made my heart jump. I froze in place, staring at the front door. No one had texted or called. No deliveries were expected. The timing felt too perfect, too sudden, too connected to everything that had happened since I left the storage facility, that I did not move at first. I listened. The doorbell rang again. A slow, firm press. Not rushed, but deliberate. My breath became shallow. I quietly folded the letter and slid it back into the envelope. I wrapped the flash drive in the tissue and placed everything inside the binder once more. Then I closed it and tucked it under a stack of magazines on the table. The bell did not ring a third time, but I heard a soft knock. 3 gentle taps, spaced evenly. My skin prickled. I walked softly toward the door and stood behind it without making a sound. I looked through the peephole. A man stood on the porch. He wore a dark jacket and held nothing in his hands. His posture was calm. His face held no clear expression. He looked like someone who could be anyone, harmless or dangerous. His eyes scanned the door slowly, as if he knew I was on the other side. He stepped slightly back and spoke. His voice was steady. He said my name. He said he needed to talk to me, and he said it was about Daniel.
I did not open the door right away. I stood completely still with my hand resting lightly on the doorknob, trying to decide whether to trust the voice outside. The man had spoken calmly, almost gently, but something about his tone made me uneasy. It was too practiced, too steady, as if he had rehearsed those exact words before stepping onto my porch. He said my name again, followed by another quiet knock. I asked through the door who he was. He paused before answering. He said his name was the same one Daniel had written at the bottom of the letter. Hearing it out loud made a sudden, strange stillness fill my chest. I hesitated for a long moment, then asked him what he wanted. He said he was there because Daniel had contacted him weeks ago. He said Daniel told him that if anything ever went wrong, he should come to me, and my hand tightened around the doorknob. I slowly unlocked the door, but I kept the chain latch in place. I opened it just enough to see his face clearly. He looked older than I expected, with tired eyes and a gentle expression. He introduced himself again and apologized for coming without warning. He said he did not want to scare me. He simply needed to know if I had received anything from Daniel, that I studied him carefully. There was no impatience in his posture. No aggression. Only a kind of quiet sadness. I asked him why Daniel trusted him. His answer was simple. He said Daniel had once saved him from a serious mistake at the company, long before any of this began. He said Daniel had offered him guidance when others wanted him fired. He said he owed him more than he could ever repay. His words felt honest, real, human. I finally closed the door, unlatched the chain, and opened it again. He stepped inside slowly, looking around the house as if searching for signs of danger. I asked him one more time if he truly knew Daniel. He nodded. Then he finally told me the truth I had been waiting for. Daniel had discovered a hidden channel of transactions within the company. They involved money being moved through private accounts connected to outside partners. Partners who were using the company to disguise their own illegal operations. When Daniel realized what he had found, he reported it quietly to this man, someone he believed could help him without involving the dangerous people behind it. But instead of fixing the problem, the people responsible found out. They confronted Daniel. They blamed him for meddling. They threatened him. They told him to stay quiet. Daniel panicked and took the binder, hoping to use it as leverage. But after that, everything spiraled out of control that I asked where Daniel was now. The man's expression shifted into something heavy and painful. He said Daniel had been hiding, trying to buy time. He said he moved often, stayed off the grid, and kept the binder close. But then he paused, and the silence that followed told me everything before he spoke the words. Daniel had been found 2 nights earlier. He had not survived, and my body froze. I felt the world tilt slightly, as though gravity had changed. The man stepped closer, but did not touch me. He let me process it in my own time. I asked how he knew for sure. He said he had received confirmation from someone he trusted, someone inside the company who still had a conscience. Daniel had been targeted because he refused to hand over what he found, because he had tried to protect me, because he believed the truth mattered. Tears blurred my vision, and I lowered myself slowly into a chair. My hands trembled. I asked the man what I was supposed to do now. He said that was why he had come. He needed the binder and the flash drive. Not to hide them, but to deliver them to an agency outside the company, people who could actually expose the wrongdoing without being controlled by it. And I thought about Daniel's letter, his apology, his warning, and the name he wrote at the bottom. He trusted this man. And in that moment, I understood why. There was something deeply sincere about him, something that felt grounded and real. Still trembling, I retrieved the binder from under the magazines and placed it on the table. He handled it carefully, almost respectfully, before leaving. He told me something I never expected. Daniel had spoken about me often. He said Daniel believed I was stronger than I realized. He said Daniel loved me more fiercely than he loved his own safety. That was why he tried to shield me from the truth. The man walked to the door, binder in hand. He thanked me quietly and said he would let me know when everything was safe. Then he stepped outside into the fading light. I watched him walk to a simple gray car, not the black one I had seen before. He drove away without looking back. The house felt different once he was gone. The fear that had filled every corner slowly drifted away. What remained was grief and a strange, quiet relief that the truth was finally out. I sat alone for a long time, letting the silence settle gently around me. I whispered Daniel's name, and for the first time, it felt like I understood him. He had not left me. He had tried to save me, and in the end, the truth had saved us both.